Hello, and welcome to the Six Figure Developer Podcast, the podcast where we talk about new and exciting technologies, professional development, clean code, career advancement, and more. I'm John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I'm John Ash.
With us today is Bill Dinger. Bill is a solutions architect with VML working on delivering digital solutions to clients. Bill has done everything from troubleshooting dial-up connections in rural Nebraska to building the digital experiences for some of America's most well-known brands. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, guys.
So thanks for having us on, or thanks for coming on. One of the things we would like to know, just kind of basically, let me start over. How'd you get started? Would you care to kind of tell us how you got started in the industry and kind of what brought you into this field?
Sure. I mean, the brief story, I was in college. I was working as a line cook, and a friend of mine got a job at a student computer lab. And I was like, I like computers. I had to get DOS games running in the 90s. I know stuff about computers. And then that started a whole career in starting customer service, and to now I learned to self-taught myself development and all the rest.
Wow. So what are you doing today?
So today, solutions architect with VML, which is a fancy way of saying I run software teams that build a lot of web applications and APIs, mobile apps here and there, depending on the client. Yeah, that's what I've been focused on the last 3 years, probably.
Very cool. Very cool.
All right. And we were chatting before we hit the big red button, before we started recording, about all of the new and fancy technologies and all the up and coming new stuff. But sounded like we wanted to talk a little bit more about back to basics and what is involved in that.
Yeah, I mean, we were joking before the start. A lot of times, we were at a conference when we met, we get hung up on advanced new technologies, the latest version of Angular, using React, latest hotness coming out, programming language, like I love Rust, Kotlin's great, all this type of stuff. And yet, when I hire developers or pull in new developers, or even some seniors at some organizations, people can't do the basics. And I'm not talking like full solid development. I'm talking writing well-structured code that's not just one tarball of grossness, right? So I think the industry, our industry, software development industry, has a problem. And that problem is that because technology moves so fast, it is easy for people to just hop on a new technology instead of just learn how to do the basics of computer science. And to be clear, I don't have a comp sci degree, right? I'm not here telling everybody we need to read New's book and learn all the functional algorithms. I'm talking, like you guys were saying, like I need people to be able to write a for loop, and people to be able to understand what a delegate is, what an array is, how memory pointers work, just the very basic stuff. And in my experience, about 20% of the industry can do that.
So what are the basics that you look for when you're hiring that developer or when you're bringing somebody else new onto your team?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on the language, right? So if I'm talking .NET, right? So I was originally a .NET guy. I know, nowadays I do way more of that, Java and JavaScript and TypeScript and all the rest. But if I'm talking .NET, I expect somebody, if I see what the CLR is, you better be able to list out what the CLR is. If I say what the difference is between an array and a list, you should be able to tell me that, right? If I ask you, when I type var in C#, what happens at compile time? You should be able to answer that probably. Did I hear a problem again about var? Was that
No. I was just saying magic.
magic?
I love VAR, but
Yeah, VAR.
If I'm talking about JavaScript, you should be able to tell me what hoisting is. Or what if we're asking TypeScript, you should be able to tell me TypeScript is JavaScript at runtime. Which, to be honest, as a backend guy, even took me a little bit, because I kept trying to do fancy DI stuff and ORM stuff and forgetting oh man, none of these types exist at runtime, right? Anyway.
Yeah. Interfaces are completely useless.
Yeah.
Don't use them. Now you have to roll an abstract base class.
Even that. Anyway. Well, yeah. So that's a good point. The basis of OOP, right? What's an abstract base class? That is fundamental to all that I could think of and know of almost all modern programming language, right? Yeah. From Kotlin to Java to .NET to now JavaScript with ES6 and all the rest. And people can't even do that part. So there's that part of the back to basics, just basic programming principles. And there's also like the more fundamental stuff. Like I get developers who don't really know, and this isn't that it's not they don't know Git or don't know Subversion or whatever, fancy source control we're using nowadays. It's that they don't understand the purpose of source control. And that gets problematic, right? Or there's stuff like people, they start writing without waiting for proper tickets, or it goes on and on and on. And instead I get a lot of resumes with or people who are just like, yeah, but I worked on insert newest technology here. And my experience has been in general, and I don't know if you guys is that if they can survive about 2 out of 5 people, I wouldn't hire for like intern level.
90 out of 100.
I mean, not everybody can do everything, right? I mean, obviously, like I've got developers on my team who are way better pure developers than me, right? I have no problem admitting that that's fine, and not everybody can be, pure the best developer. But there is a base level of competence, and some of that becomes like, just OOP. Some of it is like, hey, should I be asking the right question here? Like, if a business says do X, is this really something we should be doing? Or, it's also like, hey, why am I not logging stuff out? Why am I not running readmes? Where's my documentation? Just all the basic parts that we focus so much on the technology. We just don't focus on the underlying process. And the technology constantly changes. I've been doing this for 20 some years by now. And you guys can know how many fads we've gone through and how many programming languages we've gone through. Like that stuff changes constantly. The process behind the scenes does not really change that much.
Yeah. You can write a statement. You can write it in just about any language.
Yep.
Yeah, and we interviewed a candidate a couple of years ago, and he gave the best answer to a question. I've actually forgotten exactly what the question was, but it was essentially, how would you get up to speed on this new technology, this new language, this new framework? He said, I don't know that language or that framework or whatever it was, but I know how to program. I know the fundamentals of programming. So I have no doubt that I can get up to speed on whatever the technology is. And that was my favorite answer to that type of question, because that's really what I'm looking for in a developer. I want to know that they know the fundamentals. I don't have to teach them what a hash set is. I don't have to teach them the very basics of a language, especially if they've been doing this for a number of years and they don't have those fundamentals. You can't break those habits and reteach them. It's too much effort at that point.
Yeah.
Or that to be an exceptional individual, right? Which can't happen, but yeah, I mean, that's a real good point. Typically when I interview, I don't actually look for what a person knows, but how quick they are picking up concepts in the interview, right? Like we try to throw some new stuff at them just to see how quick they can pick it up and how their brain reacts on a new idea. Because that tells me way more than what they've learned in the past. Because somebody might have spent 15 years on some stack learning all the in and out, but you try to put them in a new stack, they'll fail, right? It just depends on the person.
So I would expect that regardless of the stack, regardless of the language, regardless of the individual being interviewed, they should be able to do like the true basics, arithmetic, logical statements, and looping statements. Like blindfolded with their hands behind their back. You should be able to do those things.
In almost any language given a few minutes, yeah. I mean, there are some exceptions, right? I think many of us are gonna be writing machine code anytime soon. At least I couldn't write x86 assembler to do that, at least nowadays. But yeah, I mean,
it would take me a bit longer, but no, I mean like regardless of the language or framework that you're interviewing for, if they have any experience in that particular technology stack, they should be able to do those things. And
showing you can do those things and being able to switch between languages so often. I mean, your guys' podcast, 6-figure developers. You want to know how to make 6 figures? Like, be able to switch between frameworks like that and pick them up like that. Like, that's how you become well valued in the industry.
Yeah, I can write an if statement in at least 6 languages. Boom.
Yeah. So Lotus script, VB script, PowerShell, C#, VB.NET, T-SQL, although don't make me write SQL sprox now.
Well, I mean, how many C-based languages can you name? Because
right, yeah, like
I can write an if statement in all of those.
Probably the only ones we're all probably, maybe not everybody. Like I probably couldn't do a list. I struggle with anything in Haskell.
I can't do Haskell.
There's certain fundamentals. Anyway, I guess the biggest thing I frustrate with people is, again, they get so focused on new technology. And I get it, new technology is sweet, guys. Like right now I'm doing some R&D for work right now around GCP, setting up some new technology for VML, and it's super fun and it's great. And like learning the basics of, like you guys were saying, like how a hash is computed is not super fun, but how the hash works isn't going to change in the next 25 years. But we'll get 17 new cloud platforms between now and 3 years from now.
So what do you think we do, maybe individually or as a community, to fix this? What is your response when you find, I mean, obviously you'd like to catch these in the interview, but when you find you haven't, how do you correct this? How do you make them better?
So we'll leave the second part. Yeah, two things. One, you got to have, I've noticed this in some projects, you have to have strong leads who review code and mentor up developers, right? And a lot of times in the industry, I've noticed leads get promoted based on technical ability, and because you have to pay them more, and there's a salary band, and HR is HR, et cetera, et cetera. That is a different technical skill set than taking junior replacement level dev, and I mean that in the baseball sense, where I can pull a random developer off the street and he's replacement level. There's a difference between taking that person and making them better versus just slinging massive amounts of really good code. And we tend to promote randomly in the industry. So I think part of it is growing the people who can lead a good team and treating them like the people who can just sling great technology. And the second thing is building processes and procedures so that if you get 17 junior replacement level devs in your industry or in your org, they can't destroy your build and processes. And you do that, with good DevOps processes, frankly, like just good process in general. That's how you prevent those mistakes from becoming catastrophic.
Yeah, I sat in on one of your talks at Little Rock Tech Fest, I believe it was, on continuous security. Do you want to kind of give us a brief overview of that, and maybe we'll dive into that a little bit more deeply? Yeah,
I mean, so going back to one of the basics, I mean, everybody on here is familiar with OWASP Top 10. Hopefully, podcast listeners, if you're not, go check it out. OWASP is a free nonprofit formed years ago to help web security. Back when it was formed in 2003, it was like web security is terrible. It's 2018, web security is still terrible, but they do good work. So one of the things I try to go over in that talk is that, security is tough. Learning a whole bunch of security is tough and expensive, but there are free tools out there that can help you. So this one of this talk is about how to integrate some of those free tools in your DevOps process. Again, going back to basics, and to prevent developers from hurting you, there are free security scan tools that you can bake into your builds that run a lot of stuff ahead of time and will catch these problems before they make it to production or before they even make it to QA builds. So the talk went over integrating stuff like OWASP Zap, which is a security attack proxy. I talked about integrating stuff like the OWASP Dependency Check project, which that will check your .NET, Java dependencies. It also check your NPM dependencies, but there's another tool that can do that better. And just warn you if you're including a package that has a security vulnerability. It's very basic, cool stuff that takes, I don't know, I think I spent like 3 days on it, getting it set up for most projects originally. Nowadays it's about a day. It doesn't take that many time, and it saves you so much time in the long run. It makes, again, your application secure, which is one of the basic things we should be doing.
Yeah, I think I started looking at the dependency checker after your talk and seeing what build servers utilize that or have plugins available for that. And I didn't see one for Azure DevOps or VSTS or whatever we're calling it these days.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't tend to typically use. So since my organization, we work with companies all over the place, and everybody has different stacks on everything. So we pretty much focus on Jenkins because Jenkins can be deployed anywhere. I'm not sure if there is I know there's a plugin for Jenkins. I do not know if there's a separate MSTS. With that said, it depends on what you're running, but there is a command line version of the dependency checker tool, which you can just execute as part of any build. Like you can say your POM, you run as Webpack, you run as your .NET build, whatever, and then it'll spit out like a 0 or -1. You can fail the build based on the command line output. But yeah, as far as individual integrations, I'm not sure. Outside,
that's what I was figuring, that if nothing else, then you could always fall back to running the command line as part of your build process.
But even that's frustrating me because like Azure DevOps, like Microsoft, like why don't you have this stuff integrated? Like, I mean, right? Like, isn't it the point of using cloud-based services? They're supposed to integrate this cool stuff for you. Anyway.
Someone just needs to write the plugin.
Yeah, it's possible somebody is. I mean, for all I know, OS is all free and nonprofit, so somebody has to maintain this stuff in their spare time. Yeah. And it's possible nobody's gotten around to doing it for And the Azure DevOps stuff is what, 2 years old? Like Microsoft rebranded it from VSTS about 2 years ago, right? So it's
no, like
two weeks ago,
yeah,
a month ago, yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah.
Wow.
Now everybody gets to go back to ADO.
So you laugh. I have done ADO print programming as recently as maybe 4 years ago. So it's still there. I hear dogs.
Yeah, that's mine.
Making sure it wasn't me. It's not mine. We're good.
So in addition to the tools available out there to plug in, like the OWASP tools, what are the basics that developers need to know about security?
Yeah. So for one, just knowing the top 10, right? Just know stuff like SQL injection. Just know stuff like XSS and CSRF and outdated dependencies. And I think I said this in the talk, and I will reiterate here. It is 2018. Patch your effing servers, right? I mean, for Pete's sake, people. But we still get it. It happens all the time. People get vulnerabilities they haven't run. They're running some ancient version of Tomcat or whatever on their servers. Know how to properly harden your application servers, right? If you're on Microsoft Node, harden IIS. If you're on, LAMP stack, know how to harden Apache. All of those are covered with OWASP in the top 10 with plenty of resources, well written. In addition to that, if you have to do passwords or session management, before you try to write your own, never write your own. I cannot think of an instance as a software developer, unless I'm working for Microsoft or a company that's writing a backend password management, where I need to write my own password encryption or hashing algorithm.
Yep.
And
yeah.
Even then, I don't have a doctorate in mathematics, so I wouldn't be doing it in the first place. So learn how to store passwords, right? Learn how to properly retrieve passwords, learn how to implement them correctly.
Plain text in the database, right?
Yeah, it's in a database in plain text.
Plain text, right?
Well, that way the support people can email them back.
Oh man, speaking of stuff, so I said I started as a help desk guy in computer labs. Like 20 years ago, you knew not to ask people for their passwords through help desk calls. And whenever it happens to me nowadays, like I like to think I'm pretty level-headed, but like something inside of me like snaps. Like, I'm just like, who is your super? Like I never say these words. I'm not, but I'm just like, why are you doing this anyway? Yeah. Don't store as plain text. How to properly, but so the OWASP has a password store, has cheat sheets. You just follow what the cheat sheet says. You just literally go, okay, I'm writing JavaScript. Cool. Go to JavaScript section. Oh, use this NPM library. Cool. Do this thing. It just step-by-step instructions on how to store passwords. It's great.
Yeah, I think last time I looked at the OWASP top 10, it had, was it documentation or logging or something surprised me that was number 10. Like, shouldn't that be higher? I think it was logging.
It was logging. So OWASP just came with the new top 10 in 2017. It was actually somewhat controversial because originally it had some security vendor specific stuff in there, which kind of goes against the spirit of OWASP. So they redid it, and the number 10, the logging and monitoring, was included on community suggestion. And the reason they did that is you essentially can't attack something without there being obvious artifacts of it. Right? Like, the best example, I do this in a talk I didn't give at Little Rock Tech Fest, even elsewhere. If you think of Snowden, right, who's probably the most famous example of the biggest security breach we've effectively had in history, had they had better logging and monitoring, they would have been like, why is this contractor pulling every state secret we have? And that's sort of where it came from. There's other ones too, though. Like oftentimes an attacker is probing and they're not doing normal user behavior. Again, one of the companies I work for is a big telecom. A normal user isn't going to probe an API 700 times with random data, seeing what happens, right? That's abnormal behavior that'll get caught. So it's those type of stuff. You're trying to detect somebody trying to attack you and shut them down before they get the chance to find a weakness. That's why it's number 10. The reason, though, it's low is that it in itself isn't a security vulnerability. It's like a warning light, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say in addition to the benefits you get on the security side, the benefits you get on knowing that your application is behaving the way that you expect it to behave and tracking down bugs and defects, it wouldn't move it up the OAuth top 10 for example, but man, it's very important to me to know those things.
You don't let the users tell you?
No. It is never good when I get a user bug ticket because then I feel bad because then it's a real person that has to experience the problem, right? Dylan Beatty, who's a Microsoft VP based out of London, I want to say, he does a great talk on logging. I don't know if you guys have had him on your podcast, but talking about, and I went help desk, I went infrastructure, then I went dev. So as a former infrastructure guy, I'm passionate about logging. And he does a great talk on it's happy coding. It makes your life easier, right? So my code, I've never seen me log as much as I do. Everything. And I also I get really passionate about different logging frameworks and different APM tools, and because of how easy it makes my life. Because there's nothing worse, again, than getting a call and it's we can't figure out what's going on in production because who knows what this function or this database is doing. There's no debug level to turn on. We just have to guess, or we have to push out custom code with custom instrumentation. So yeah, learning how to instrument up your code will make you beloved by your ops people, or in the modern day of DevOps, make you just loved in your team, right? Then other team members aren't just trying to figure out random stuff. Yeah.
So where would you start? I mean, obviously log everything, but where could you, what would you point to people to say, these are the start here and then grow out to everything?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing is start with a well-known logging framework. Don't try to roll your own, right? Use something like Log4net, Log4j. There's other ones out there, I'm sure. Those are the ones I'm most familiar with. So start there, right? So learn how those do. Almost every modern logging framework follows the same basic pattern. You have different log levels, you pass in a message, and it just goes. It logs to something, text files or database, something like that. As far as where past it I would go, the next thing I would learn to log is log at the boundaries in your application, right? So if I'm taking in request data, I'm probably almost certainly logging out the request as a debug, okay? Brief thing, we were just talking about security. If the endpoint you're taking in is taking in credit card number and PCI or PII data, don't log out that part of it. Or passwords or anything like that. So keep something in mind. So I start logging at the boundaries, or if I'm making a SQL call, right? I'll log the SQL call. In general, though, log all the things if I'm doing something. Also, if I'm starting, so say I have a presentation, classic MVC app, right? So I have a model build controller. I'll log my controller, and then once I step into the model and I start building my model, I might log out, hey, I got this data back from the database. I'm going to construct the object based on this and spit that up. And that, as long as you're using the log levels appropriately, there's effectively no performance level in production. For the production, your ops guys or you will set your log levels to, error, and you'll never see all these debug stuff. But if something breaks, they can turn on the debug level and you can go look.
Right.
The other big thing, first tip, I can't believe I forgot to mention this. If at any point in your career you write a try-catch block and you silently swallow that exception, I personally hate you, because I will get on that effing project and I will have to fix that in production, and I'll find it and I will not be upset. I will not be happy at you. Never do that. Always log out errors. Please,
but sometimes errors just happen in this one place and we don't care. I mean, it's okay.
If you don't care, don't write the error. I don't even.
And Bill hates Clayton.
I'm gonna get one of Clayton's projects, and I'm gonna be up at, again, 4 a.m. on Thanksgiving, and I'll be like, oh, try catch, empty catch. A comment there this never happens. It's fine.
/ swallowed exception because we don't care.
Right. This is normal. We should expect this, right? Because nothing changes. Anyway, please, more detailed error logging you can give to your developed to yourself effectively. You will thank me later. It really does help. There is a book on logging. I cannot think of it, guys. If I do, I'll mail you after. That goes over trying to remember the author. It's a quick 10-page thing on how to approach logging from an architecture point of view, right? So if you're the architect or lead of a project, how do you set that up properly? And not just inside the application, but then how do you send the logs? How do you let them be easily retrieved, et cetera, et cetera? It's a quick thing. I'll try to find it. I think Microsoft put it out, actually. Maybe it's on Microsoft Docs site.
Cool.
Yeah, the project I'm working on currently recently implemented Log on that, and really enjoying using that and interfacing with that. Was tracking down a particular bug that was happening because our application talks with a number of third-party applications, and having to debug that in a lower environment. So I just cranked up the logs. I was the only user in the application and logged about 30,000 log messages in probably an hour. But without that levels of sophistication and cranking up those logs, we would either be capturing that amount of data in production for every single user, or somebody would make us turn it off because that's just too much data.
Yeah, which is also, it's a good point you mentioned that much logging. When you start talking about writing like containerized microservices, like that all sounds fantastic until you have to support the goddamn things. And you have to troubleshoot a debug error. But like one of the cool things about containers is that if you're spinning up containers for per user or per a small group of users, you can just turn on logging for this 10 subset of users and not have to worry about log files for every human being coming into your app. It's one of the cool things about containers that does really help. That nobody ever talks about, which is kind of weird. Like it is actually really sweet if you set your logging correctly, that you get a much smaller subset and you can trace down the stack and just look at that container's logs.
Yeah, but you kind of need to have that in mind when you're architecting those types of solutions, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's and you only really know about it. I think this is why I love DevOps so much, is because it classically developers we separated from ops. So ops is they're trying to figure out something and like, oh, these stupid developers didn't write any logs, right? Nowadays that we all work together and the teams are more integrated, it's like the developers and leads are saying like, oh yeah, I could really use some logs here. And people start thinking about it ahead of time and start thinking about, I can instrument my app up better so that when I'm doing this, or I'm helping my teammate sitting right next to me who's responsible for this running in production. And also the new APM frameworks. I'm not no vested interest in these companies, but like stuff like the New Relic and there's another one I'm forgetting the name of. Like those are amazing. Like if you get those, they're very expensive, but if you can set up in production, they will save your butt so many times, and they're really easy to integrate with too. So yeah.
So along the lines of back to basics and maybe being a better DevOps practitioner, are there any tips and tricks or suggestions for those out there in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm super passionate about DevOps, coming from an ops side, going to developer side. For one, there's two different ways of approaching DevOps. The way I typically see it in these big enterprises is it's a DevOps initiative and it gets pushed from the top down. I have never seen those succeed. They always fail. What I have seen succeed at organizations is a grassroots. So one team or a group of teams says, we're going to start running our little bit of this enterprise in a DevOpsy way. And then they start doing it in half the organization, like that'll never work here, blah, 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 blah. And then they start seeing the success. Mm-hmm. Once they start seeing the success, everybody's like, oh, how would you end up doing that? And then they all start talking to you. And I've seen that be way more successful coming from the bottom up than coming from the top down. Now, maybe it's worked somewhere. I just have never seen it. So I would say grassroots, always start small. You can always expand later, and any success, believe me, people in the organization will pick up. The second thing I would say is, there's a great book called Accelerate that recently, I don't know how recently came out, about DevOps. A group of people did a bunch of scientific studies on what practices are actually measurable for improving your DevOps velocity. What they mean by that is there's like 3 key metrics, right? Mean time to recovery. So if something breaks, how quick to recover. How long it takes for a feature to reach production. So from when it's ready to dev to production, what is that time? Is it a week? Is it 6 months? Whatever. And how often you deploy. And they looked at all the practices that influence those 3 key factors, and the results are actually pretty surprising. And I would highly encourage everybody to take a look at that book. The ones I remember the most of is, for one, continuous security, like running security constantly, had a measurable impact on all 3 of those metrics.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think it's cool. The other stuff you would assume, like deploying more often, it turned out was more heavily influenced by the faster you integrated. So if you're doing builds, or if your feature branches are living typically less than a day, you're improving all 3 of those metrics. But one of the ones that was most controversial, I'm still not actually okay with it. Like I haven't come to grips with it. Was like, I'm a big fan of GitFlow. I love GitFlow. I have a release branch, immersion into master, etc.
Yep.
But they discovered that trunk-based development is more impactful than GitFlow as far as actual improving those metrics. So just merging. So when something is merged to master, that commit is then ready to be pushed out. That development branching spot that they found was more strongly correlated. So anyway,
Yeah.
those are some tips.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. That's really cool. One of the things we always ask everyone, and especially with you having a very sort of non-traditional path to getting started, do you have any words of wisdom for people that are getting started into the industry that are trying to grow and make themselves better?
Yeah, I mean, a couple. For one, like, you will be intimidated. But even the best of us occasionally have to Google, how do I do a for loop in Kotlin? Like, it happens to everybody. Don't worry about it too much. And second thing is, like, I started by using scripting languages, and I spent a lot of my time learning how to debug things. And I feel like that is, if I had to tell, here in Kansas City, we work with a local group, and they spend a lot of like accelerated IT program, right? A 3-month boot camp type thing. And they spent almost a month of it just teaching people how to debug. And I feel like nothing helped me more than learning how to step through the execution of a program, be able to look at the variables, see how they change it on the fly. It's one of the reasons I love stuff like PowerShell so much, and scripting languages in general, because it's such a quick feedback loop that it lets you figure out your problem. So I think we throw developers in these big monolithic apps, and it takes them too long to debug, and it's their pain, it's a hassle. Again, get back to basics. If you start small like that and really focus on the minor stuff, that you can gradually build up your base quicker.
Excellent. So do you have a social media, Twitter, LinkedIn account that you can plug for people that might want to follow you?
I do, but to be honest, unless you want to hear me rage about the Royals being terrible, or my Packers being terrible, or my Huskers being on one game. No, I do try to, besides sports rage, I do try to tweet. Again, I spend a lot of time speaking. I do try to tweet speakers who have relevant content that I think people should enjoy. I talked about 2 different ones on this interview here. So if you would like to know more about that type of stuff, a lot of times this stuff is available for free. If you can't go to the concert, can't go to the talk, you can take a look at their pre-recording. You can take a look at them later. And so if you want to, you can follow me at Adazlian, ADAZLIAN on Twitter. So
okay.
It's a handle. I'm sorry.
Do you have any speaking engagements coming up for yourself?
Yeah, I do. I'm speaking here in about a month in Lithuania at Build Stuff Lithuania. That's the next one coming up. I don't think everything confirmed past that. So if you happen to be in Lithuania, come catch me in Build.
Awesome.
Very nice. Well, thanks so much, Bill. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
That was Bill Dinger. Bill is a solutions architect with VML, working on delivering digital solutions to clients. Bill has done everything from troubleshooting dial-up connections in rural Nebraska to building the digital experiences for some of America's most well-known brands.
If you like this episode, please like, rate, and review on iTunes.
Find show notes, blog posts, and more at sixfiguredev.com.
And be sure to follow us on Twitter. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at sixfiguredev.
This has been another episode of the Six Figure Developer Podcast, helping others reach their potential. I am John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I'm John Ash.